There's still nothing out there quite like Stalker. These words were penned in 2010 by Dan Pearson in his review of Stalker Call of Pripyat in 2010, and they remain as true now as they were then. I was recently inspired to play this game again, and I'd like to spend some time telling you why I love it, and to mix in some inevitable criticism. Spoiler warning as always. At its core, Call of Pripyat is an open-world first-person shooter. Good thing then, that there's a nice selection of real and not so real guns on offer, and they all feel fairly good to shoot, with a nice bit of ballistic physics to boot. Combat against other humans is methodical, cautious, and extremely lethal. One wrong move can very easily mean the player's end. Combat against the mutants you may see is usually far less methodical, and each mutant generally requires a player to create their own set of rules for dealing with them. Their sounds and sometimes visual tells will tell an experienced stalker exactly what they're dealing with before they see it. The same goes for anomalies, paranormal danger zones, that each have unique behaviour. In this way, despite getting upgrades throughout the game, a player's own experience will affect their performance more than their equipment will, as even in endgame armour an unwary stalker can be blown to bits by a couple of false moves. Given the number of bullet sponges, ability unlocks and scaling mechanics in many open world games, this was and still is a breath of fresh air. It is extremely pleasing to jump into a new game and be effective immediately because of my experiences being a stalker, and knowledge from the other games carries over. Due to that, you could quite correctly claim that I never had a true new player experience in Call of Pripyat, but there are NPCs to break down the hazards of the zone for a player if they come across something dangerous they don't understand. The knowledge is there, but the solutions are not. The Stalker series was never one to hold a player's hand even when instructing them directly. There are a lot of amusing glitches and some bugs, but I've yet to encounter a game-breaking one, and that's boring anyway, so let's get down to the nitty-gritty. Exploration is rewarded in this game. Not through discovering large locations, those are marked at the beginning, but with small stashes of items scattered around the world in nooks and crannies, on tops of buildings or in attics. These can hold anything from some energy drinks to a gun and some ammo, and finding one is always pleasing. NPCs sometimes reward you for tasks with the coordinates for a stash, and from there one can glean some satisfaction from going over there and figuring out how to get at it. Anomalies are usually localized to mostly small areas and signposted by map markers, but within those areas they are spread out and the player must throw bolts to figure out where the danger is depending on the specific anomaly type. Depending on the grade of artifact detector they possess, they are either led to nearby artifacts or merely notified how close they are. Other than that, the AI likes to wander around a lot, so a player can find themselves with dogs nibbling at their arse with little warning, and opposing NPC factions will shoot at each other if they meet in the wild. Sometimes a stray boar will help kill a quest enemy for you, for example. These won't technically be random encounters, as NPCs are all tracked and controlled globally, and I appreciate that sort of dynamism. My only real complaint about the exploration in the game is that the total map area feels like it doesn't have enough interesting locations in it. Sure, some white space helps pace the experience, but particularly in Pripyat itself, it can feel like much of the map is just sitting there waiting for a quest objective to happen. Once you've explored an area and picked up any important goodies, there's rarely a reason to visit again aside from the 3 hubs and combing anomalies for artifacts. S.T.A.L.K.E.R tried to make areas relevant by having a sort of faction war system, but it went too far in the other direction and ended up bombarding you with the same mission to kill a bunch of dudes constantly. I don't know of a way to properly address this, but a mission being generated every day or so of in-game time to visit an old location and clear out some mutants or bandits to grab an artifact or document would have been welcome. Shadow of Chernobyl did this to an extent with random side mission generation. That said, it remains very enjoyable to creep around camps in the dead of night not being able to see anything and hoping you don't get your knees bitten off by mutant hamsters, hunting for artifacts, and absorbing the exquisite atmosphere the game creates, and getting shot in the face by zombies. Speaking of atmosphere, the weather in the game is exquisite, which is mostly achieved through lighting effects. Clouds and storms create darkness, lightning creates flashes across the terrain. The sound of heavy rain drowns out other noise. It's all very engrossing, and often impedes the player's senses in a tangible way. Before a player gets a night vision capable helmet or upgrade, they will often want to avoid rolling around in the dark, though it's occasionally unavoidable. Here you can see me fumbling around a building for a mission at night. Until the very end, the main story is fairly sedate, asking the player to investigate helicopter crash sites in their own time. Things become a bit more urgent once one reaches Pripyat itself, but the player can still wander off and do their own thing. Side missions, while not the most plentiful, are pretty much all engaging and lethal on some level. Infiltrating a mercenary camp to steal a laptop, a murder mystery, and destroying a mutant lair with nerve gas all happen in the first level, of which there are 3. Okay, now I've provided a mostly gushing overview, let's dig in a bit more. The player's progression of power. This may be less applicable to new players, but generally I feel like it's too easy to amass vast wealth and amazing guns in the early game. Nimble, the guy who handles special orders for equipment, hangs out in the first area Zaton. I feel like he would have been better placed in the second to prevent players being able to turn themselves into a walking tank with an exoskeleton and endgame rifle immediately. That probably sounds like an exaggeration, but depending on how lucky a player is, it can be reality. In one of the 2 playthroughs I did for this video, I got lucky and found 2 rare artifacts, I can't remember which ones right now, on top of a mess of others, and managed to afford an exoskeleton before I went to Yanov for the first time. In the other, I was sitting on 200 grand by the time I finished the scientist's mission line going into Pripyat prep. I have no issue with how powerful the player can become. Ultimately, it creates a great feeling of progression for the player to become an indestructible killing machine when they were once getting shredded by a couple of shots. However, I feel that the duration the player feels vulnerable isn't really long enough. Shadow of Chernobyl went too far in the other direction, I feel, throwing players at a bandit camp with nothing but a few mags of ammo and a pistol that seems too weak to even kill a bandit with a single headshot, but the ease at which a player runs headlong into vast amounts of money in Call of Pripyat means that they can buy their way into having limitless supplies and easily upgrading their equipment. Not that Shadow of Chernobyl was completely immune to this. After a couple of brutal hours through bandits and agroprom to reach the bar, that game handed the player a suit with over double the defense of the one they're probably wearing, and a scope for Warsaw-packed guns, making everything suddenly and significantly easier. Speaking of which, while I love the ability to repair and upgrade equipment, I again must question the wisdom of having Tier 2 upgrades available effectively from the get-go. The areas containing the requisite tools in the first level aren't even dangerous, the dozen or so zombies around the basic tools notwithstanding, and on top of general effectiveness and damage increases, using those it is possible to make oneself effectively immune to psi damage and have night vision, which trivializes a few anomalies and makes nighttime significantly less imposing. The Tier 3 upgrade paths, aside from one tied to a mission chain, are blocked by the required tools being in Pripyat itself, which is the 3rd level. I can't help but feel the other tiers could have been handled like this, limiting the Tier 2 tools to the 2nd level. Another idea may be to limit the maximum possible repair level of certain gear using certain tiers of tools, so perhaps the starting armour can be fully repaired with basic tools, but the TRS-301, a more mid-game gun, cannot be fully repaired without fine tools and so on. Not only would these changes limit the player's power progression to a less immediate pace, it also limits their effectiveness slightly with the equipment they do manage to scrounge up, since honestly even the starting rifle is a beast when upgraded. This issue extends into anomaly exploration. Firstly, despite there being a plot point that anomalies move after an emission, the anomalies in the game never move. I'm not proposing that entire anomalous fields move over the map, merely that when emissions occur, anomalies shift within their fields, mission-critical ones perhaps excepted. This would force players to be cautious virtually whenever they approach any anomaly, as currently one can learn the ins and outs of anomaly fields and become comfortable relatively quickly. On top of that, the Svarog detector, unlocked after doing some scientist missions, actually shows exactly where anomalies are on its screen. It is not an exaggeration to say this breaks artifact hunting, and in my view it would be reasonable to excise the anomaly positioning feature entirely, or make it somehow unreliable. Perhaps it could only see anomalies that have been set off near it. This would mean anomalies like gas, electro and burner could be mapped by throwing bolts, but whirligig and vortex would need something a little more substantial, allowing the Svarog to be extremely useful, but not ridiculous. Also, radiation. Radiation is quite simply not dangerous enough in Call of Pripyat. In the previous games, especially Shadow of Chernobyl, it was extremely lethal, but in Call of Pripyat all the player needs to do is equip a jellyfish artifact, and one has a fixed initial spawn in the claw anomaly, and they are completely immune to almost all of the radiation in the game. I would appreciate a reason to care about Geiger counter clicks beyond taking the utility artifact off. It's not impossible this is some sort of bug, perhaps the anti-rad effect's ticking too often, but even then anti-radiation drugs are extremely common, almost comically effective, and have no side effects. Maybe an energy recovery penalty would have been fine. Though speaking of anomaly effects, it must be said that in Shadow of Chernobyl artifacts were pretty much everywhere. This was most likely a side effect of anomalies also being everywhere, but I would most appreciate something in the middle. Artifact spawns clustered around major anomalous activity, with anomalies dotted around other areas and in the open. The AI. As I stated before, the global tracking and behaviour for NPCs and behaviour for animals is cool as hell. But strange things can occur. Sometimes, a stalker squad will simply ignore the dogs biting their nadgers off, and the bandits will seemingly never be hostile in the wild, even if you piss off the faction and kill their leaders. Most impressive, however, is the incessant friendly fire. Mutants run around a lot, and NPCs will happily keep shooting them even when they run behind another friendly. During one playthrough I was actually killed by friendlies because of this, and while it was funny, it's not exactly expected behaviour. So, the game has some problems, but it's still great. That friendly fire incident actually happened in the tunnels to Pripyat, which remains, for me, the best sequence in the series. After expending a lot of effort finding documents and gathering allies, you head down an old lift into a string of maintenance tunnels filled with noxious gas when they were evacuated and sealed years ago. The atmosphere down there in the pitch black is palpable, especially since to my knowledge there is no way to get down there with a functioning night vision system. Your squad will chat a bit and make commentary as you fight through mutants, zombies and brainwashed fighters, and dodge anomalies. Ultimately, it is shorter than something like the labs in Shadow of Chernobyl, but it works extremely well at conveying the camaraderie of heading into a hellhole with a few trusted allies, and while you receive no tangible reward for getting everyone through alive, it does give a sense of satisfaction when everyone survives the ordeal.
No worries. Real men often take the back door.
You gotta press the button.
I feel like I should touch base with the story. You are a soldier sent in to examine the crash sites of several helicopters and find out why the operation involving those helicopters failed, eventually finding the survivors and evacuating them from the zone. It's pretty short, shorter than the other two games, and as I've mentioned, I believe that is to its detriment. It's also very straightforward, just using the zone as a backdrop to make creepy stuff happen all the time. But it pulls it off fairly well and has some fun dialogue. Overall, I think I'd say the story is inoffensive. There's not really enough there to write home about. It is difficult to summarise why I like Stalker so much. Call of Pripyat is my favourite. It's the most accessible and doesn't have artificially muted early game weapons, looking at you, Shadow of Chernobyl. And while certain mutants lack lethality, and it wants for more dark and terrifying secret labs, it does still carry the atmosphere and feeling the first game created. Stalker is intimidating, brutal, and mysterious. The way a player's experience with the zone makes them more effective at surviving it more than their gear does gives it an air of authenticity. Call of Pripyat is the most refined title in the series. If you haven't played Stalker, and it sounds like extremely your shit, try Call of Pripyat. If you like it, you'll be prepared to dive into the others.